we must establish a personal connection with each other. Connection before content. Without relatedness, no work can occur. Peter Block.
Bending Not Breaking, Season 5, Episode 3, Civil Wars, Part 1. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And we've got a lot to talk about today.
So much.
As always.
Yeah.
You would think we would shut up by now, but we feel like we got things to say.
Korra content
Absolutely.
left.
And we also have something special today. Ben,
something very special. Or should I say someone very special?
A little tease there.
That's right. We have our first guest for the season. Very exciting. I am happy to introduce John Oliver. John Oliver is a chaplain and chaplain educator here in Durham, North Carolina, and he is with Duke University Hospital, and we're so glad that he's here. John, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to Bending Not Breaking. We're excited to have you. Before we kind of Ben's getting his master's in divinity, I'm not. What is a chaplain?
What
does
a
that
chaplain?
even mean?
Well, a chaplain is a person who is usually hired by a hospital or a prison or some other institution, and we visit with patients and we explore how their spiritual resources can support them in their ongoing journey. And that's the long and the short of it.
Wow.
So very simple, not nuanced at all, just very straightforward.
Oh, no,
work.
it's pretty nuanced too. But the bottom line is we do try to walk with people. We try to be their companions in their journey. So, for example, someone is sick with a disease, we would stand with them, hear their journey, walk with them, explore what fears they have, what joys they have, how they're using the spiritual resources they have of community, of family, of their faith tradition, and all of those things begin to support them and create a web underneath them that helps them make meaning of their life and their illness.
Wow. So are chaplains always, like I imagine just like a random patient, like all of a sudden a chaplain shows up in the room? Is it like a requested thing or is it something?
It's both and.
Okay.
It's both and often we do get referrals and we'll go in and see patients that have been referred to us, but often we will float through the hospital and we'll visit people. We believe that what we offer has to do with existential work, and there's a lot of pain in the hospital that can be treated physically, but there's also a lot of suffering, and so this is a chance for us to be with people in their suffering, not only their pain. So we engage them around the challenges they're having and the fears they're facing, and we walk with them in their suffering.
Wow. So I imagine the burning question from some listeners are like, what is a chaplain doing on an Avatar: The Last Airbender?
What is the chaplain doing on? Well, let's be really clear. The main reason we're here is because one day Ben and I were in class together, and I was saying something to the effect of, I really think there's a lot in Harry Potter that has to do with, the spirituality, and there's a lot going on. And so we started talking about fantasy and how fantasy can speak to our real lives as well. And then Ben turned me on to Avatar, so I became a fan, and I'm working my way. Yeah, I'm working my way through the seasons. But I'm excited about the show. It's fun to watch, and there's a lot of great stuff in it.
And so, from my recommendation, just to be clear, you watched all of Avatar: The Last Airbender,
right?
And then you've watched how much of Korra?
I've finished the second season,
which is like. That's pretty impressive.
That's a lot. That's a lot to
my
go on.
My poor wife and my poor dog have not seen me very much. So
I don't think I've ever taken that big of a leap of faith off of Ben recommendation.
Yeah, well, there you
before.
go.
Yeah. I feel like very honored, but also like the show speaks for itself.
Well, it does. And there's a lot of great things that speak about spirituality, but they also speak about human life and about some of the struggles that we all face. And there's some great life lessons in Korra. And in Avatar.
You just heard the pitch for our podcast.
There you go.
The
John
whole thing
Oliver.
right there.
Yeah. So we know a little bit about your relationship with Avatar, and so today you have chosen. We offered you the option to choose a lens, and after watching this episode, you chose the lens of relatedness. So I'm curious, what's the brief version of why you chose it? Because we'll dive into the real, fun stuff later. But why relatedness, and what is relatedness?
Relatedness, being connected, having something in common, being family with or community with someone. That's the way I think about it. I was shocked by how Unalaq could show up and all of a sudden do three major things with the spirits, and all of a sudden the Avatar was off following this guy whom she really didn't trust or know.
Yeah.
And that willingness to break the relationships with Tenzin, with her father, with her mother, with her tribe. I don't know that she broke them with her tribe, but she broke these relationships that seemed really important to her. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this, is that there's real great strength in relatedness, but there's some threats to it that are really important. And I think we see a lot of those in this episode.
Well, I'm ready to dive in. But before we do, we have a very important responsibility to our listeners to recap the episode. And when I
On
say
your
we,
mark.
Yeah, when I say we, I mean Sunshine.
I hate it. I'm already over it.
All right. We're going to count you down in 3, 2, 1, go.
The Northern Water Tribe shows up, and then Bhumikaya and Tenzin discuss their childhood, and Ikki ran away, so that's not great. Tonraq holds a town meeting and asks Korra to do him a favor, and she says, I'll do it for the tribe. And then we get some Eska and Desna dislike the South and their relationship, and we see Bolin doing things that are strange. And then I'm not uniting, I'm invading Unalaq. And then Korra tries to play neutral in a conflict, and then more things happen, and she stops an attempt for a kidnapping, and then people get arrested.
That was pretty good.
Well done.
Yeah. How do you feel about it?
It's my least favorite. I feel so much pressure. I
like
like the conversation.
pressure.
The conversation's always really nice. The having to recap things in 30 seconds, less so.
Yeah.
That's my feeling on it, Ben.
I'm really proud of you.
Don't patronize me.
Speaking of relatedness, do we need to talk?
I mean, maybe.
Always.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive on in. That brings us to you, John. Like, what's a moment that you want to touch on first?
So I think the first moment I want to touch on is an odd one, but it has to do with Desna and Eska and Bolin, where Bolin is their I guess they're running around
Caddy,
and
almost,
he was chauffeuring them around, and it was odd to me what someone might do to be in relationship with somebody and what someone might do to not be in. So at first he was flirting with her in the episode before, and now all of a sudden he's realizing she ain't who he thought she was.
Yeah.
But that part of the episode to me was funny in that sometimes we're in too deep and we're getting related to somebody that we really don't want to be related to. So that was an interesting piece of this episode to me.
Wow. There's so much there, because with Desna and Bolin in particular, there's this constant bid for connection from Bolin. He wants to be seen, he wants to be known, he wants to be in relationship. And then he gets it, and he realizes that the type of relationship he didn't understand and see what I might have seen as red flags, and what I imagine you did as well.
Well, and even what Korra said.
Yeah, of course, like, I thought you thought that was obvious to you, right? And so it's interesting, like, how sometimes our desire to belong overrides our capacity to see red flags.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been in a romantic relationship ever can probably speak some truth into that, right? So this idea of even the idea of someone, I see this person from across the room, I think I put a picture in my head of how they behave and what they're like, and then we start to date, and then I ignore the things that aren't that because I'm so enamored with this new relationship, and then by the time you're in it, I can change them. I don't want to leave for fear of being alone or for making them upset or making them uncomfortable. And it's relationships are hard. Romantic relationships are with emotional ties even harder. It's a lot. It's also like the way she treats him. I think it's fair to say is
Abusive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
call it what it is.
laugh at my humorous comment. Yeah.
And so the other side of that, just from a show making standpoint, that makes this episode tough to watch for me is how much of that abuse is played for humor.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'm like, how many people are living that and watching that and not finding it funny at all because they're trapped in that situation. And so it's tough to see that played on screen as like, what a joke! Ha ha ha! We are laughing, and it's like, I think it's a very real thing that kind of gets overlooked or played off that way in this episode.
I think it's really important to count the cost of the relationship, and I don't think he was doing that until it was too late. But she was exacting a huge cost on him in order to be in relationship. And then when he tried to break it off, pull the what was it? Pull the
leech off.
Yeah, it wasn't that easy for him. And even later on in this show, later on in the episodes that follow, they end up coming back together in a strange way too. So it's a really interesting relationship.
Well, it's this weird, interesting thing where we realize that Bolin's capacity for setting boundaries is a little lacking, it seems. And so what we see from him is this attempt, but it's this desire for comfort. He doesn't want to disrupt anything.
Right.
He doesn't
want to make anybody mad.
Anybody mad. And that is something, again, very easy to identify with.
Well, and I think it's because he's afraid of her. I mean, that was she was really hurting him along the way. So.
And literally had the capacity to, like, you saw how many times she sends spikes of water spikes, ice spikes, and it's like, okay, she can literally like get me in one go. This is terrifying.
So that's one piece of relatedness that I think is really important to think about, is how much is this costing me? How do I live into the boundaries that I want to have myself? And are the people around me saying I should stay in it or get out? And maybe listen to some people around me that have been friends along the way.
So a key part of relatedness I'm hearing from you is when you get into a relationship where there is a toll you did not expect,
right?
Lean on your other relationships that you have built trust with.
And it's really important, especially if people disallow you to have those relationships, like they no longer let you talk to somebody. That's a huge red flag. And it's really important that you take care of yourself in that kind of relationship.
Well, we even see that in a previous episode, in the previous episode, where the moment he goes and runs to Korra, she literal, like, physical obstacle goes in the way, a block of ice, and then she pulls.
Why are you initiating physical contact?
Exactly.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right.
And so I think that is the hard part, because how do you tell someone to do that, to lean on your other relationships if there aren't other relationships because of either that interaction or just because they weren't there to begin with. And I think that also makes it tough.
Yeah, that's hard.
So another relationship I loved, and I think we see this, is back to Bolin and Mako, where they're really trying, and it seemed like they really have had a connection their whole lives. They were orphans. They grew up together. They fought together. Were they in the gang together? I was trying to think if they were in the
I think so. Were they
I think they ran schemes. Like
think
they were both in it.
I think they did things as kids to like help get money and then got out of it, because they talk about. I guess maybe Bolin said in it, I'm trying to remember the first season, but Bolin said something along the lines of like Mako did it to keep us together.
I thought it was Mako, but it might have been both.
But
Bolin does it later, so.
Well, yeah, there we go. The other thing I wanted to name about relatedness is my discomfort with the way Unilock shows up and has this secret power. And frankly, I want to talk someday about the spirituality as power, having spiritual power, when in many traditions we think of spirit as a person or internal to us, rather than powers that live like electricity or like force or like strength. So that's one of those strange parts of this that I'm still grappling with. But I think I wish for Korra that she knew a few things about following dangerous people. and that would be one place I would say in terms of relatedness. And she seemed to be naive to who he actually was. And she's a kid, and frankly I think she felt lost, and she wanted to learn what he was doing. I mean,
yeah, I think that's what's really problematic for me when I think about Korra, because the fandom really gets on Korra for her actions this season. And part of me is like, that was a mistake. But the other part of me is like, he is manipulating her.
Right.
It's not her fault, right? She is the victim here. And so I think yes, we need to cultivate these spidey senses, so to speak, and we need to cultivate awareness of the behaviors to pay attention to. But she is 16, 17.
Right.
And like has had no exposure to that because she was protected her entire life until she was 16 and went to and had season 1.
Right.
Right? And so it's really tough. It's really hard.
Well, it's one of those things where it highlights the importance of people are looking to be seen, people are looking to belong, and the power of someone saying, I see you. Unalaq's doing it for malicious reasons, but he's still saying, you're the Avatar. I see you. I respect your ability.
All the right language.
All the right
to
language to her. And so we see that power of belonging and being seen and how it can draw you in because that's what people are looking for. And when we relate that to the real world, that's how we see people join these fringe groups or extremist groups is someone who is looking and saying, I'm not finding a place to belong or be seen. Oh, well, you can belong to us. It's all these other groups' fault that you're this way, so come join us. We'll treat you differently. Mm-hmm. And then here they are in, fringe groups, extremist groups, hate groups, anything else like that, because that was the only exactly because they're the ones that say, oh, I can see you for who you are, and they bring them on in.
Right. So I was thinking for our listeners, a few things that might help them to be aware of when they might be following the wrong person. You might be following the wrong person when that person starts disparaging or denigrating people that you know and love and have trusted your whole life. And what happens there is often we see the flaws of our loved ones too, and so they have flaws. So we hop on that bandwagon and we go for it, and we have flaws, but what people they use that as a way to divide us from someone.
So, for example, this is Unalaq like disparaging Tone Rock, right?
Right.
For like, hey, your father's the worst.
Right. Exactly.
He's the reason these dark spirits are here. He's the reason that the South is in such disarray.
And she had no way of knowing that was a lie, which is another thing I want to talk about.
And going back to episode 1 of this season, also. The first like super red flag for me with Unalaq was only I can be your spiritual teacher in this situation, and we're like
yeah, no, that's a huge when anybody thinks they're the only one with some magical truth or some sort of elixir that will make your life better, then that's a real red flag for me. What is the old saying? If it's too good to be true, it's not true. It's too good to be true. Yeah. So that's one thing. Disparaging, saying that they have the secret, they know something special that you can only get from them. Another one is when they're willing to break the law to meet their own ends for their own personal gain. They lie and deceive for these things. Now, she wouldn't have known that necessarily, but it turns out later when she finally catches up with the judge later on in the next episode where he tells her the whole truth. But it's also important when someone is and I don't know that she could have told this, but I think she might have, especially when the ships started coming in, when they're seeking their own power and will use anyone or anything in their way to get their own way. And so those are things that I think are really good red flags for our listener to see as a result of this episode, that we do see some things going on that can be helpful for us to not fall into those fringe sorts of relationships.
I have a question around how do we... Okay, so Unalaq is leveraging an entire army of power. Like, it's very visible, right? I'm curious, how do we bring that into our own perspective when not most of us are friends with people who can leverage an entire army? Where, like, what does leveraging that kind of power look like in a quote, typical relationship or system, family system?
So I don't know about one way that I can think about that is there are pastors that that begin to say that I have the only truth, and there are religious prophets, and and in some worlds we call them false prophets, that want to move into people's lives, take their money, promise them things that are not.
Ponzi schemes,
Yeah,
also
things
kind
like
of a
that.
deal.
Yeah. In terms of family relationships, I think you can move into relationships like the Desna relationship, where someone is, and really she's a chip off the old block in some regards, where they're using their power to hurt you, and they want to control your every move. Those are good things to be aware of, or good red flags. They're bright red flags.
Yeah, because one of the things that makes me think about in this conversation is, setting, if a therapist says, hey, you need to set boundaries with your family because your family's creating some of these toxic behaviors, which we know is can
It's a
be
thing.
very common.
Oh, that's a thing.
And so how do you discern, like, your therapist or a friend saying, like, hey, this might not be okay that your parents are utilizing this, versus someone who's trying to come in and create a wedge between you and your familial relationships when it isn't
That's a great question.
that bad. You know what I mean? Because there are times where it's like, no, you're in an unsafe, familial home. That's not for you. You should be out of there, which is a very real situation, versus someone coming in and trying to do that for their own malicious intent.
So I experienced that slightly differently, in that I don't hear the therapist necessarily casting aspersions on the family, rather saying to the person, I want you to be safe.
Right.
And so when the focus is on me and them wanting me to be safe, and them having some real examples of how I'm not being safe, then that can be a different thing. But you're right. It can feel like the same thing.
I don't know. That's there's a, how do you learn to trust the right people? Because I think we're seeing Korra kind of experience that, right? Like, she already doesn't love Dad. That's probably not the right word. She is already kind of questioning.
In conflict with
Dad, with Tonrock, because of, you never let me go anywhere. You held me hostage at the Southern Water. Like, she's already
because of the secret that we learn about in this episode,
and
too.
So the wedge was already kind of there, and I feel like Unalaq just kind of took a railroad hammer. Click.
Yeah, that's isn't it terrible when someone knows your weak spot and they push that button and they can just really
siblings are excellent at that.
They are excellent at that. So, and that's, I mean, I think this is, with the Desna and Eska sibling, the Mako and the Bolin siblings, the Tomrock and the Unalaq sibling, all of these siblings, and then of course you have all of the Tenzin and his brother and sister, and then Tenzin's kids.
Yeah.
There's several different family systems that we're looking at.
Yeah.
There's one other thing though that I want to say that I think is really challenging in relatedness, and that is secrets. And I think there's a difference between secrecy and privacy. And I'm not sure exactly how to tease that out, but one of the things I think of as the difference between secrecy and privacy is secrets are private matters, but someone is getting hurt by them. So it's a secret that Daddy's drinking. Well, the whole family's getting hurt by his alcoholism or her alcoholism, however that's rolling out. So that's one way to think about secrets and privacy. I think there's some things that need to be private and that are perfectly great to be private. But when you move into secrets and keeping a secret, that becomes a challenge for me. I don't know. The secret, I think, is that she was being hurt, actually. She was being hurt by not being able to travel the world like the other avatars had done and learned. As Unalaq rightly said, they've traveled the world to learn these skills, but you had to stay here, and they kept you here. So this secret, he was able to use that secret against Korra and her parents and to separate them out too. So I think secrets are really a challenge in any system.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what did y'all experience in that part of it?
I love the kind of the idea around the privacy and secrecy, because it's not one that I thought of, and I think you're right. There are things that you share with a small group of people that you trust, because of the shame that can be centered around it, because
the beauty, the intimacy, it's nobody else's business, right?
Right. And so for that to be able to exist, I think very much needs to happen. And it is always, as someone who works with kids and has for the last 13 years, there is such a power to transparency and decision making that allows people to understand why rules are in place, to understand why safety is there, and kids get it. But there are also things where it's like, we're not going to share exactly why this is happening because you need to know that we're keeping you safe, but you don't need to know that, external factors X, Y, and Z are present right now or whatever it might be. And so it's interesting to kind of navigate that. But for a child, sometimes that black and white, it has to be more black and white. The nuance, the gray is tough to decipher at that moment until you get older and see it. Experience it, learn about your own emotional awareness and things like that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there was a moment when she was talking to her mom, and I thought that was a precious moment too. I liked this
really
where they were
beautiful,
talking, and mom says, we kept, so the truth is out. So mom says, what did she say? What's going on, honey? It breaks my heart to see our family being torn apart like this. And then she says, I found out that Dad's been lying to me my whole life. And then Unalaq told me everything. Unalaq shared this truth, and he did. So I think what I'm inviting us to do is to figure out how do we live responsibly with secrets.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that she needed to know that they were banished when she was 3, but as life goes on, why aren't we going back to the North very much? Well, here's what happened, and it's almost like finding out you're adopted when you're 15 rather than when you're 4.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I have an interesting relationship with secrets as in my family. So I grew up in a family that had a lot of drug involvement. And so I grew up believing secrets kept my family safe, much like this experience here. And I grew up being told that if this is shared, then we lose things, and specifically families going to jail and things along those lines.
Wow.
And so for me, I had this internalized concept of secrets keep my family safe. Mm-hmm. And secrets are a form of safety, and it's a way of ensuring that I'm not vulnerable to these things that will take away these things that I love and care about. And so it took a long, long time for me to grapple with that in a way that has allowed me to see that was harmful. Right. And it took well past them getting caught and then, going through that whole ordeal.
Wow.
Where I was then able to process how I didn't do well with that as a mindset. And it really helps in order to be related, this secret was a major barrier.
Right.
And so part of me is asking the question of how much of a barrier is there between parents and Korra, and what was that barrier? How was that barrier experienced by Tonraq and Senna? Right? I wish we could tell her, but we love her too much. It really reminds me of Harry Potter and Dumbledore also, where Dumbledore's I couldn't tell you when you were 13 because I loved you. I couldn't tell you when you were 14 because I loved you. And every year until year 5, and where he has to tell Harry. And it's kind of this similar deal where love, our core connectedness and our want and yearning for that compels us to keep secrets, right, in order to protect what we have. And so I really empathize with it. And it's hard.
I do. And one of the things that the other piece of this feels like there are so many paradoxes.
Yes.
Because by trusting Korra with that secret, the family could have been stronger. I'm not saying it would have been, but it could have been. And by trusting her with that, at least there would be nobody else telling her. There's an insult to someone else telling me, well, you really know who your daddy really is.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was him. No, it's not. It's those kinds of secrets, when they catch us by surprise, are deeply painful.
Yeah.
And that's why another reason why I really felt for Korra in this episode was that it really does. It smarts when someone else tells you something that nobody else close to you. And it's almost like sometimes people don't tell secrets to someone, and then when they find out, everybody else knew, and they feel
ostracized,
betrayed because you didn't trust me and you were laughing at me behind your backs, or you all knew this and I never. And there's all sorts of deep pain that can happen. So
I think you named it. I think Korra feels betrayed, right? Like
Yeah.
this is something that I should have known about, and it's it's hard. That's hard.
And we see it deeply affect the way that she holds relationships with other people throughout this episode. Like the way that she engages with other people because of that is somewhat tarnished by the feeling of being betrayed by, her father. Going to Unalaq, telling him that, like, hey, these are the things that we want to do, and him coming at her and then start using that manipulative language again around, like, you're the only person who can do this. So when she goes and engages with the conflict with everyone on the street, she's coming at it a very different way than she may come at it if she didn't feel betrayed by her parents and like betrayed by others.
I was confused in the moment where this person that is not her father is dressed up and covered up and trying to like go and take out Unalaq, and Korra stops him and is like, "Dad, why would you do this?" Hears him speak and still thinks it's Dad. And I truly am like sitting here going like, there's no, like, I can hear the difference. It's clearly not like, and so I wonder.
It's not James Remar.
Yeah. Like, I wonder if Korra is in so much in this mode of betrayal that's one of the reasons she was so willing to believe that was her dad.
Did you know, so you knew that Korra and Dexter from Showtime have the same dad?
Whoa.
Dun, dun.
That's an unfair comparison. Oh, wow.
Lots of secrets.
Lots of relatedness.
Talk about secrets. Yeah. Wow.
So I think that just the idea of secrets being something to think about when you're in a relationship. So as our
Just constant
listeners,
discernment.
and as our listeners are building relationships, do you trust this person with a secret? If you don't trust them with a secret, then maybe you need to think about this relationship some further, and will this be one that you can continue?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if you do trust someone with your secret and they're not trustworthy, then that's not necessarily on you that they can't handle your truth. And so I think secret, but the point of it is that transparency really does. The truth will set you free. It'll hurt, but it will set you free.
Yeah.
And that's the hope.
We jumped into sibling relationships have been mentioned several times, and I want to dive into it specifically. Kaya, Boomy, and Tenzin.
Oh my God, they're
for sure.
fun.
Because they're fun. There are lines in this episode that I'm like, that is a
That cut
dagger.
deep.
Yeah,
Like that. Maybe that's why the Avatar fired you. Like just things that were just like. Kai even says something that Tenzin at one point, and I was just like,
You're right. It is your fault.
correct. Like she
Wow.
and
Wow,
and
yeah.
why is it that siblings have this ability or families have this ability to hit that place hard? How do we navigate that? Because I find it easier to stand up to like strangers and friends when it comes to when they cross my boundaries or say something that's hurtful. I feel like it's so much harder to do it with family.
I think that family is all invested differently than a stranger would be. So she is super invested in Korra's doing well. And Boomy is very invested in finding Iki.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, there's some investment that they have, and so that's one thing I'm wondering about is because they're so invested that they're fighting with all they've got too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was probably one of the more beautiful moments in this episode for me, was the moment where, okay, well, I'm going to go find Iki, and Tenzin's like, I'm going to do it. And then Boomy's like, I'm going to help. It's really
like that,
important.
yeah.
And I was just like, oh, you really care about your niece. And then Kaya's like, I'll help too. I was like, wow, like that's just a really, I don't think that my uncles and aunts would do that. So it's just like, that's just really beautiful. Like, wow, that's I love that. I just
There were some fun moments too early on when I guess it was Milo came up and said, "Is there a baby in there?" After his mom had just had the baby, and then he wonders if Boomy's got a baby in there, and just the humor and
how
silliness,
real is that,
just,
right? That is just. So okay, so this is important, I think. What we're touching on is the power that relatedness has, and so I believe that siblings we are so tied inextricably to our siblings through the nature of, like, we have known them since birth. They have seen us through our worst moments, They've seen us through our best moments. And so when people see us at our worst, they have the tools to leverage that, and we are more vulnerable with the people with whom we are in greater connection to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what that means is there is a greater responsibility with a greater sense of relatedness, because when that is not what's the word, shepherded well,
Fostered.
Oh, there's a word I'm thinking of. It's not coming. Stewarded. Thank you. There it is. Stewarded well.
You're welcome. Happy to help.
Yeah. Then what happens is the relationships are more tumultuous, and you're more likely to break. And I'm curious for you, John. Like when I speak about this, like I think of terms like there's a word that I learned called casual cruelty, where it's these remarks that we throw casually that are just like these
Zingers,
these dagger zingers that like it guts you, it's just like, oh, it was a haha moment, right? I was just saying it because that's what we always do. We're just, it's just like in a family jab, when really it's like
right.
And we don't say anything because also it's family. And so there's a lot going on there. Like, help me unpack a little bit of that. I don't know if what's going through your head when I say all those things.
Well, what goes through my head is, so I have 3 kids, and I just didn't put up with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't be mean. You can be mean to something, but you can't objectify people. And I didn't like it. Now my kids did it, and they still do it, and I they still get at each other. I wonder if that's not the whole thing. This is what Adam and Eve's sons ran into, right? I mean, the very beginning. If we go back to that very beginning story of jealousy and of fear of being usurped, and seeing our own failures through somebody else's body, and so we're often harder on other people because we're projecting into them ourselves. So those are some things that I'm thinking about as this goes. But I do hope parents can say, being mean, just that doesn't work. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
And we're gonna treat each other as human beings and not as objects. And you can't call me a name. You can't call me an X, Y, or Z. And still be in relationship. We need to be able to say, I am a subject, and I had a hard day today, and I had 3 emails that just wouldn't send correctly, rather than calling me a jerk for being late. Thank you for not calling me a jerk for being late, by the way. But understanding that there's a narrative going on underneath this, and I don't think families are often able to see the narratives and can quickly move to objectification. And those, to me, feel like real problems.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. And, we see Pema, who tries to hold Janora and Milo accountable, and like, why do you always do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so she's clearly had this conversation with them before, but kids will be kids.
Yes.
Right? And when kids are kids, we have to hold them accountable. Right? There has to be this learning and growth that occurs. Otherwise, this will continue.
But what happens is when you have secrets, or when you don't have, when you have things going on that are out of balance in the parental relationship, it makes it hard to create boundaries for your kids too. So sometimes that's a really important element, if you ask me, is to say, part of the challenge for Korra, for example, was that her parents had these things going on behind the scenes that they didn't feel like they wanted to make her aware of them, and so they would let her get away with things. They could let her, you saw her in that very first episode when they knew she was the Avatar. She was tearing through the house. Of course, that could be just the exuberance of a little baby with all this power.
I love that moment.
I'm
the Avatar. You got to deal with it.
So, but now in terms of like siblings, though, I think that's one of the things is how do we remain, how do we as adults moving into adulthood begin to see each other as adults? And I think when we're kids, there's a lot of grace that needs to happen there. Yeah. But as adults, we need to begin to not treat each other as objects, but treat each other as subjects.
That's the deal.
You're a
That's
grown
the
up.
rub.
You're a grown up too. Like, acknowledge it. Yeah.
So this moment where I thought was an interesting moment, and I'm just interested, like you're talking about your relationship with your children, and I think that's really integral because we think about what that looks like, and that's what makes me terrified to ever have children, is because like I don't know that I have the skills in order to really
neither
cultivate.
did I, and neither do I, just to be clear.
Yeah, but it's
Constant learning.
It's also I hear you, and it's also like I am terrified. Not that I'm planning on having kids anytime soon, but when I think about this relationship that these three had with Aang, and
Right.
they talk about this, and Tenzin's like, oh, remember we went out on vacation with, and they're like, no, we weren't there. And then he does it again, and then like that, like, and that's like really seems to be a core root problem that has gone unacknowledged on Tenzin's part.
Well, and so having a favorite child is a bad idea. Let's just be clear. The others might feel some way about it, but parents do that, and that occurs sometimes. And so how to move beyond it? I've got friends that tell me, "Oh yeah, I'm the favorite," or "My sister's the favorite." There's no question about it, and we just deal with it. I don't. That doesn't compute for me because it seems like that's a hard I don't know. It just doesn't compute. Maybe it does.
And the most generous assumption I can make is that Aang like didn't intend to treat Tenzin as the favorite, right? I imagine it was like the weight of trying to make sure he had all the airbending knowledge and that he needed to impart on him, and that manifested
before Aang passed or whatever else.
And it manifested that way, right?
Yeah, you know what struck me about that is in the next episode. I know y'all will discuss this later, but didn't Tenzin teach Milo how to train all of the lemurs?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that scared me when he was. I mean, the reason it scared me is it kind of made me wonder if Tenzin had received that kind of instruction from his dad, and so he was passing it on that way, and that, getting back to the weight of this being on his shoulders, and it was like really odd how Milo just had those lemurs all flying.
Oh, I didn't
in
just
formation.
train one. I trained them all.
There's more to come in that. I haven't seen the rest of it. No spoiler alerts, but I bet they show back up, or I hope they do. Other things in terms of relationships, relatedness. I was thinking there's this thing called family systems theory, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with some of those things, but to me there's some things that happen with triangles that when one person speaks about somebody else, and I think triangles happening here included a big one with Korra learning some things from her uncle that her parents should have told her. So that triangle, she was then triangulated rather than saying, which I think is a good thing to do if we can. How about, Ben, you don't tell me what so and so's saying, but let me go to them and find out instead.
Yeah, so stopping that triangle from happening.
I think you're telling me Dad's story rather than telling me your story, and I'd rather hear your story. Dad will tell me his story. And that's really hard to do because, frankly, it's you
have to be aware of it in the
well,
first
you have
place.
to be aware of it, but you also have to not be curious and be able to put the boundary down to say that's my story, not yours. But what I'm getting at is knowledge is power within relationships.
Yeah.
And so this
clearly leveraged by Unalaq in this episode.
It's the knowledge, they were leveraging that knowledge against Tenzin. His brother and sister were. I think the truth. That wasn't the truth, and so they're leveraging the truth too. And
Interesting.
I think it's so important to lift up that again, because the skill set of being able to shut down someone and say, "Hey, I need to hear this from the original source. I need to hear this from the person whose story it is we're talking about," is a skill that I have never practiced, and honestly, just until this point, didn't realize that's a skill that I should be practicing.
Well,
and
could is a better word. I don't love the word should, but okay, but yeah.
could be practicing, absolutely. Because there's so much power in saying that's not your story to tell, or allowing someone to tell their story. as opposed to someone else telling it for them. And I think that that's something that happens in workplace. I think that's something that happens within friend relationships. And I think that that is a skill that if I take away anything from this episode, that's probably a great thing to be able to start practicing.
Massive trust building exercise as well. Like, not only does that constitute like saying, hey, here's my boundary, like I in order for us to have a trusting relationship, I need you to not share things that are not in your vault but in someone else's.
Right
Exactly. And so I'm building trust with the person who I'm like setting a boundary with, but I'm also cultivating trust with the person who I chose not to hear this gossip from, right? And so like I can go to the source and say, hey, this is what I heard, can you tell me more about it? And that is a way to cultivate trust rather than to just be like, this is what I heard, did you do it? And like just like it's just completely different.
Right, letting them tell their own story too.
Yeah.
I was thinking of an example, a story that I think y'all would appreciate. You know, the last Harry Potter book, I was on like near the end. I think Bellatrix was fighting Molly. And my wife comes in and says, hey, John, you want to take the kids to the pool? Because, you know, it was summertime, right? And she reads super fast and had finished the book. I said, well, I don't know where I'm going to be emotionally at the end of this book, you know, because I've been waiting for these books all these years. And, you know, I want you take them. She said, oh, fine, I'll take them. Well, I get to work the next day, and my friend who works down the hall, lives in my neighborhood, comes up and says, so did you cry at the end of the Harry Potter books? My wife is telling my story rather than allowing me to tell it. And so this is where this whole idea of knowledge being power can also be a really important part of relatedness. And this thing about not triangulating and letting someone else tell their own story and let them have, you know, their own vault with you is really actually a really important gift.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think that just really speaks to everything that Unalaq says, literally, that comes out of his mouth is a problem. Because it's either leveraging power, knowledge is power, it's intentionally driving a wedge between Korra and her trusted like relationships. I just like there's this moment where he says, Korra, like you need to stay out of it.
Right.
Neutrality is the best. And then like you know what that means, right? Like it favors the side of the oppressor, which is him. So it's like
it's at his benefit to make sure Korra tries to stay neutral as opposed to choosing a side.
Absolutely.
And we've even talked about this before, where it's, you know, balance doesn't necessarily mean that you're neutral all the time.
No.
Sometimes you have to stand on one side of the scale to balance it, right? So, and so in this moment, you know, what does that look like for Korra? It plays to Unalaq's favor to say, no, you're the Avatar. You're supposed to be neutral in this, when the reality is that's not necessarily what the role of the Avatar is.
I think I just realized
Aang was not neutral in the 100-Year War, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not that's not what that means.
Yeah. I think one thing I realized just now is like one of the things that I'm finding so problematic with Unalaq is that it's so
everything
carefully articulated half-truths.
Right.
Where what he says at face value is right. It's like it's true, but it's also like, but and I think a lot of people don't have the way to articulate that those half truths are, you know, power manipulation, and I don't think a lot of people can recognize that and like name it.
Wielding knowledge in ways that were hurtful.
Yeah. And I think that even though like I think that's where it comes the idea that, you know, being honest and being, you know, compassionate with that honesty, those are two different things. like
right.
You can be honest and really harmful, right? And I think this is an example of that.
Well, and we've seen that weaponized before. At least I feel like I've experienced relationships where that's been weaponized before. This idea around telling your parents, hey, this caused me harm, right? Or this was like trauma-inducing. And for a parent to respond, were you ever not clothed or fed? And did I ever hit you? And the answer is like, well, yeah, I had those things. And no, you never did. It's like, well, then,
what more could you want?
Then, yeah, exactly. And you're like, that's not... And so you're seeing these truths like, no, you never hit me. No, I was fed. No, I had clothes. Those are all true. But me saying that this was still caused harm is also true. And so when you navigate and weaponize these, like,
that,
exactly,
though, right? So many people have no capacity to hold that ground because they're like, no, you're right, you're right, you're right. And now I'm like, but I'm not right anymore because you're right. And again, this idea of like this binary of just because what you said
polemics,
is true.
Exactly. One
right?
pole or the other.
Yeah, just because what you said is true does not mean that everything else that you're implying is also true. And I think that's just something we really need to lean into especially as I consider the fandom on this series, is like people blame Korra, and I'm sitting here going like, she was manipulated, y'all. She is the victim. Pay attention. All right. What else? Anything else on relatedness?
I'm trying to think. I think the last part of the episode where when she realizes it wasn't her father and she goes home and she said, "I'm so glad it wasn't you." And then there's a moment of realization and reconciliation that I thought was beautiful as well. So that to me that it was almost like you could see her waking up back to realizing that the people that have loved me, that have sheltered me, that have given me everything that I have, and that do actually care about me and have wanted me to grow, that the truth was there, and that's the whole truth. And yes, they make mistakes, and yes, they did get banished, but the bottom line is she realized that they loved her, and that was a beautiful moment for me.
Yeah. It reminds me of this moment in the last episode with Mako and Korra had a similar, like, they were fighting and then they came back and, made up. And it was like, oh, that's a really beautiful moment, right? And
We've always said it's really nice how quickly characters find resolution. It's almost like they do it purposefully in 22 minutes, like every time.
I mean, but they're showing us, right, what it looks like.
Correct.
to
Yeah.
do
Showing
that.
us the way, right?
They're giving us these tools, and I'm sitting here going like, I want to be able to do that fast.
Because we don't. We don't do it in 22 minutes. We don't.
No.
Never.
Like that's not how that plays out. And so, but it is. I agree. It's super nice. That is a beautiful moment, ruined so quickly by Unalaq.
Yes.
But it is because it does show us this ability, and I think the capacity for forgiveness, the capacity to say I made a mistake, the capacity to say I was wrong, are all really important.
Which is one of the things that he had that Tonalak had said to Korra was, I should have let you. When he said I saw that open up, I realized I should have given you more latitude. Is kind of the way I'm interpreting that to learn more. So he apologized in his own way, and I think that's a big part of what helped her see. And I do think that's one of the things about being related. I never heard them apologize for not telling her, and that could have been, they made an excuse. Well, we just wanted you to have a good life.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the same as saying I'm sorry. I wished I'd have
It's
trusted
so
you
not.
with the truth.
And I feel like that is such a common thing. I can't speak to it as a parent, right? But I can speak to it from a child's perspective before, of where what I needed to hear was, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Like, we can do this better, versus like, well, these are the reasons why I did that. And,
Right.
and so, like, that's why it happened that way.
There is so much grace given when someone says, I made a mistake and this was my mistake and I'm sorry I did that and that it hurt you, and I'm not gonna do that again to the best of my ability.
No.
I made the mistake.
This is where we make a plug for Harriet Lerner's "Why Won't You Apologize" book. It's phenomenal. Nine like steps to apology. I have steps in air quotes there for our.
For those that aren't watching, huh?
Little shuffles, back and forth.
But yeah, I think that's a really beautiful articulation of what an apology needs to have in all of its parts in order for it to really be helpful. And I think it's really helpful. I recommend it as a book.
Well, and that's, I think those are key points of being related, is when you can recognize your own humanity, it allows me to have mine, and we can be humans together, and that's what the core of relationship to me is about.
What a beautiful place to kind of end this section.
Agreed.
It's moments to ponder on. While we take our quick break, we will be back with highs and lows, devotion, all the fun stuff that we like to wrap our episodes with. And so we will be back in just a moment.
now it's time for the weather forecast. That's right, everybody. We have our highs and lows for the episode. What? It's a really, I was getting my weatherman voice. That was my, you didn't like that? We're still trying to figure out a good name for this segment. But, I tried it. I liked it. You didn't like it?
Nope. Felt like a first grade classroom again, and I did not like first grade. So here we are.
Great. I like first grade.
Talk about highs and lows.
Anyway, so again, just to remind everybody, we are talking about our favorite episode or favorite moment from the episode, and whatever that means to you. Same thing for our lows. Like, what is something that was like really unfortunate or literally metaphorically the low point for us in the episode? And I'm happy to toss it to whoever is ready. Is there anyone who'd like to start with either a high or a low? We can go in any order.
I can start with a low. I think I already mentioned it. I don't love seeing the abuse between Eska and Bolin played out for humor, and so that's a tough moment for me to watch. Yeah, so that's a low moment for me in this episode.
Yeah.
A low moment for me was when Korra's mom did not apologize for having kept the secret, but she just kind of made an excuse for it. So that was a low. She could have really said, "We were wrong, and I'm sorry."
And it's so interesting because that moment's like I still had the feels.
Well, I
right?
appreciate their love, but she could have done a little bit there with that. So.
I know. I love that. Yeah, I struggle a lot in this episode. I think what makes me sad is that I am constantly that person who's agreeing with Unalaq and also like vehemently being like, no! And so I really am lamenting how that has evoked in me this like not having been able to discern the difference in the past. And so that just brings up a lot of things where I feel less than because of my experience with people like Unalaq. Mm-hmm. And so it's not necessarily a moment. It's just, the character of Unalaq is a downer.
There you go.
Question: when we play board games, do you view me as the Unalaq of your life?
Absolutely. You are the worst.
Except unlike Unalaq, I win. So...
debatable.
Sorry.
And now we're talking about highs because I'm getting angry. What makes us happy? Anyone?
So I liked when Tenzin and his brother and sister went looking for Iki. And I thought that was a sweet event where they all decided, well, I'll go with you. We can go to. I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. But I also liked when Boomy said it's 50 times faster just to jump down the, and I can, and then they use their bending powers and beat him down there. But there's a sweetness about that I think is, and they came together for Iki.
Yeah, I loved that. Sunshine, what about you?
I see myself in Milo. Like a child version of me was very much Milo. And there's the moment where Pema is like asking what's happening with Iki and like where she is, and Milo's giving this long answer, and she like finally digs in. He's like, she ran away. And there's such a genuine aspect to that of having conversations with kids and saying, hey, tell me what happened here. I don't know. I need you to be honest. I really don't know. Last try being honest. I hit him with a ladder. And you're like, okay, like, thank you for being honest. And like, now we have a different conversation. But that is such a moment that I've had so many times with kids while working with them over my career. And so the moment of that being like, I don't know what happened, to she ran away because we were making fun of her, was like, all right, I appreciate the honesty, Milo, and we're going to have a conversation later, but let's go find Iki. Was one that it just felt very true to human nature, and I thought that I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, there's so much. I think the thing that sticks out the most for me is this moment at the end with the Korra comes back and this reconciliation that happens between her and her parents, and just the things that are said and like the trust that is reestablished is just like, like it's just like that's what I want. Those are the things. And I think it was driving towards wanting for that. It's like this music that has all these dissonance, and then here's the resolution that is promptly ruined. And so it's just the nature of a 2-part episode, I guess. But that moment was really beautiful.
Okay, I'm going to challenge you two on something. So you've been talking about polemics or kind of either or, and so we've lived into the good and bad. So I want to know a middle of the road moment for you. What's a gray moment for you?
Oh, that's interesting. Things that I'm neutral on.
Oh man, I don't even know. There are moments.
Well, I wonder if the point isn't that sometimes the highs and the lows really catch our attention.
Yeah.
And so we can have a little bit of grace for Korra because she's looking at the highs and she's looking at the lows. So that's the gray areas. Yeah. But it's just kind of paralleled out, this whole thing of her doing it and then we're doing it too. So.
Yeah.
The dinner scene between Bolin and Eska, and that's a blah moment for me.
That was so funny.
Man.
Mako and Korra are like, let's go get dinner.
Oh no, I got a text message moment of like, let me answer this text message during this part, and it's fine.
Let's see, are there other moments like that? Let's see. Trying to think of one.
I mean, like, Varric and Julie in this, where there are certainly things that are going on, but that wasn't like a oh no moment or a oh yeah moment. It was just like, oh, that's those two. Okay. But
okay. The moment for me was right after at the very beginning when she separated the fight that we're gonna have, and then she walks away. Maybe it's, and then I didn't love it, but it didn't really, I could understand.
There was no resolution
there,
right?
Yeah. So that was kind of my.
I don't speak in absolutes very often. I try not to do it ever. Right?
Ever?
I try.
Ever?
I try not to do it
never,
ever.
Ever try to do it.
That's why I say I try. But I will make this absolute. If you are the person who is yelling at kids for throwing snowballs and willing to physically harm them over it,
right?
You're the wrong. You're in the wrong.
I think that's an absolute.
Fair. Yeah. Fair.
You're on the wrong side of that argument.
Yeah. Don't harm children. Let's just don't do that. All right. We have successfully completed the weather forecast. At least for this episode, we'll call it that. And that leads us to our devotion. And so what we're doing and inviting everybody into now is a chance to set an intention or goal with the element of fire.
What are you
doing? What's going on? Why is this happening? More importantly, why is it still going on?
It's Hendrix. It's Fire. It's the song. It's great. Good song.
Oh, man. I should probably have known that.
Yeah.
Oops. And relatedness.
And we're looking for a new co-host for Bending Not Breaking.
John? No, anyway. That was going to be you, the new co-host.
No, I don't think so.
It takes a lot to put up with me for an entire hour. So.
Fire and relatedness, and we're setting an intention with that. And again, we're switching elements every time so that we are inviting this, balance that we need to cultivate through this kind of elemental lens. So who wants to share a goal or intention with these in mind, fire and relatedness?
So I'll start with what I was thinking about. Fire is an element, but spirit isn't, apparently.
Okay.
And so when I guess it was Mako that was trying to fight the spirits with his fire.
And Korra.
Korra did too. So this whole idea of trying to wrestle the spirit with an element doesn't work. So my intention is going to be to explore how I can be honest and intentional about communicating, connecting with spirit in my own personal spirit, but also that around me. Not trying to bully it into something or burn it into something, but trying to be in relationship with it.
Oh, I love that. Wow. Okay. For me, I am kind of really reminded of this sacred fire from Avatar: The Last Airbender, specifically in the Sun Warrior area. What do we call that? Village, area, tribe,
Island.
island. Yeah. Anyway, there, and they talk about how this was the original fire, and all fire is kind of connected to this, and I think that's really beautiful because even though we are there's fire everywhere, right? Being able to recognize that it is a piece of the original fire is something that is often lost, right? And I'm curious to think about how we are all connected in a way, and our relatedness is perspective and perception. And I think that a goal of mine is how do I begin to see the fire in you and the fire in me as being not just similar, but from the same source, right? I think that's something that I want to kind of meditate on over this next week.
Love that. My turn?
Yep.
Yep.
You're the last one.
Oh, no. The Last Airbender.
Fire. We're on fire.
I know. As I kind of lifted up before, the concept of allowing people to tell their own stories and stopping others when they're trying to share stories that belong to someone else, I think that takes a level of vulnerability and courage that requires a little fire, that requires a little bit of confidence in doing that. That is not an easy skill to stop someone and say, hey, I want to hear that from the person whose story it is to tell. Is not an easy thing to do. It's very uncomfortable. Like even when you think about asking people to stop talking when you find what they're talking about not appropriate, or like that's a tough thing to do. So I feel like this is even more personal than that. And so that requires a little bit of fire, but I think it's important. I think it's important for us to be able to allow people to share their stories on their terms. And I think that that's something that I have to be more proactive. I can be more proactive about allowing to take place. And so that's my intention for this week.
So beautiful. Y'all, I think we're going to do well this week. I believe in us.
I like it.
Yeah. Oh, I feel all warm inside. Maybe it's the fire. So now we're going to gratitude.
The heater's also on for the first time in a while.
Yeah, we turned that on for you, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that brings us to gratitude, which is more warm and fuzzy. So that's really lovely. And again, just gratitude for everybody who's listening is this moment for us to reflect on a character from this episode in particular that we're grateful for a particular reason. Who wants to go first?
Well, I was thinking the obvious title character, Korra. I'm grateful for her humanity and the way she really honestly lived where she was, who she was, when she was, and I also am grateful that she was able to see her mistakes and then come finally back to her father and recognize that he had indeed been her support all along.
And Korra will continue to make mistakes, and she will continue to grow and learn, and she will model what that looks like for us, and I think that is important.
To remind myself how good the writing is because of how viscerally I feel some of her responses to things. Because in my head, as someone who is not 16, I'm like, that is such a irresponsible response, or that is such that's not the way to get what you want. But then I also recognize, I'm like, but you're 16 and growth is the point of the show, and you're not supposed to do everything perfect, and no one is. And deep breaths. That's that's how I get through episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. So my person is Pema, and I was kind of struck by your comment, John, about raising your kids, and I'm thinking about how being specifically in relationship with Tenzin, who has this immense responsibility to Republic City, who is constantly like the last airbender in a way, right? Like, yes, his children are airbenders, but he's, for all intents and purposes, like the airbender. And has all of the immense responsibility of the Air Nation under his entire belt, much less his family and his children. And so it just really makes me think that like Pema's doing a lot of work raising these children, and it's pretty unrecognized in the show and not lifted up. And I just want to name that is a lot of work that she is putting into that family and into helping those children learn these lessons. And it's evident her passion in this episode that she really cares about that. And I think that I'm really grateful for people and parents like Pema.
That reminds me of a moment in the episode that I want to talk about, so we're going to backtrack just a second to talk
Excuse
about it.
me.
We're going to do it because I want to. It's our show, Ben. It's I'm the one who has to uphold, the Airbender legacy, our dad's legacy, and Kaya comes in with, we can do that too.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
like, anytime that I hear you're not alone or like we can help is like I love those moments.
Yeah.
I love a moment where someone says you're not alone, and I think that that's really important here because Tenzin he puts a lot of pressure on himself.
He's overfunctioning, right?
And so for Kai to come in and say it's not just you, we also are representations of his legacy, and it's a very nice moment that I appreciate.
Yeah. Hear.
That being said, I'm grateful for Tonrock.
Yep.
So
let's talk about Tonrock.
Who had nothing to do with that moment.
Yep.
Again, I really appreciate when someone's able to admit when they're wrong. I don't do it enough, and so when I see it, I very much admire it. And he does that. He does that this episode. He admits where he could have been better. He recognizes and has an awareness of where he might have made some missteps as a parent along this journey. And seeing that, I think, is a wonderful example for the rest of us on how to navigate life and the ability to say, I messed up here, and we can do better, and I can do better. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Hear. Well, we did it.
We did it.
Wow.
That's the episode.
John, this has been incredible. Like you've been a huge source for all these things, helping us name red flags, helping us name behaviors that can be problematic, and also helping us name things that are really important and integral to relatedness. And so thank you for being a part of this.
My pleasure and an honor to be with y'all. It's been fun, and thank you for introducing me to the Avatar Nation.
Oh, it was my pleasure. that
Excited for you to finish things.
I am looking forward to it.
There's also books and comics. There's a whole world open
There's
to
a
you
world,
now.
yeah, the universe, right?
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank y'all for listening and following along this show. And if you want to continue to do that, BNB_pod, wherever you follow on them interwebs. So TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all the stuff.
And Patreon.
You can support us on Patreon.
That would be cool.
We don't have sponsors.
Nope.
Y'all are our sponsors.
Y'all are our sponsors.
So yeah, join in on that. And then also, if you'd like to join on the show, literally send us a voicemail with your thoughts on one of our episodes, a moment of the show that you liked. You can send those to thearkofe@gmail.com and just do a little 2-minute voice memo about a moment in Avatar or Legend of Korra that means something to you. And so feel free to join us there. Other than that, thank you so much for listening. I'm Sunshine.
And I'm Ben.
And this has been Bending, Not Breaking. We'll be there next time.
Bye-bye.